Have you ever wondered why we love even knowing it can go wrong? Have you ever stopped to think why, even after so many disappointments, betrayals, or missed encounters, our hearts insist on trying again? It's as if something inside us says, "Go ahead, take a chance. It might hurt, but it's worth it." But is it really worth it? Maybe you felt it. That mix of fear and excitement when someone new appears. A butterflies in the stomach feeling, not because everything is safe, but precisely because it isn't. Because truly loving is giving up control. It's throwing yourself into the dark, with no guarantee that the other person will hold your hand at the end of the fall. It's trusting, even knowing you might fall. And you know what's even crazier? That's exactly what makes love so powerful. Alan Watts, a British philosopher and one of the most brilliant minds of the 20th century, saw love as something far beyond the fairy tales we grew up hearing. For him, love was a necessary risk, a radical surrender, almost like a leap into the void. And if you've read or heard any of his reflections, you know he wasn't just saying that. Watts challenged the way we think about relationships, emotional security, and even our own identity when we're in love. What if I told you that, according to Watts, love isn't about finding someone perfect, but about accepting losing a little of yourself, about making room inside your chest for something you can't control, don't own, don't fully understand, but feel with an almost uncontrollable force? Stay with me until the end, because what you're about to discover now may surprise you, and perhaps even change the way you experience love from now on. Many people avoid truly falling in love. They put up barriers, create rules, and try to protect themselves. But what Alan Watts teaches us is that every attempt to control love is deep down an attempt to deny life itself. Because life, like love, is made of uncertainty. And if you constantly try to avoid risk, you also end up avoiding the depth, intensity, and even beauty of the most human feelings. Have you ever been there? Have you ever met someone who seemed to have everything going for them, but you froze, shut down? Maybe it was fear. Fear of getting hurt, fear of losing control, fear of repeating old pain. But what Watts proposes is just the opposite, that the only real way to love is by allowing yourself to be vulnerable. No guarantees, no contracts, no masks. And this goes against everything society teaches us. We grow up hearing that we need to choose wisely, think carefully, be careful about who we give our hearts to. And yes, of course, there are healthy boundaries, but real, deep, transformative love, that doesn't happen in the realm of logic. It blossoms in the realm of surrender. Watts said that love is like trusting in a rough sea. You don't know if you'll float or sink, but you dive in anyway, because staying on the shore, observing, is a very pale way to live. And when you allow yourself to dive in, even when you're afraid, that's when love shows its power. Not because it's safe, but because it's true. And this is where the central point of this conversation comes in. Love, as Alan Watts himself argued, is not about avoiding suffering. It's about recognizing that suffering can be part of the process, but still choosing to love. Because not loving, for fear of getting hurt, is also a form of suffering. Perhaps even crueler because it's silent. It's that pain no one sees, the pain of those who deny their own nature. So today's proposal is to delve deeper into this idea, to explore why, in Alan Watts's view, love is only real when we accept risk, when we don't try to control, measure, or predict, but rather, when we surrender ourselves consciously, courageously, and, as contradictory as it may seem, lightly. Stay with me, because throughout this video, we'll understand how this vision can not only change your way of loving, but also heal old wounds, free you from emotional armor, and remind you that truly living is allowing yourself to feel, even if it means getting hurt sometimes. And maybe, just maybe, what you need now isn't more protection, but more surrender. Now pay attention to what comes next, because this is where things really start to get deeper. And if this topic resonates with you, if any part of this conversation truly touched you, leave a comment. I'd love to hear your thoughts. That's how we grow, together around here. And if you want to continue delving into this kind of reflection, subscribe to the channel. This will help keep this content alive and reach more people who, like you, are seeking to better understand love, life, and themselves. Now stay with me, because what comes next goes even deeper into this idea of love as surrender. Because when Alan Watts talks about love as a risk, he's not just saying it, he's pointing to something many people feel, but can't quite put into words. That love demands radical surrender, and that in this immersion we strip ourselves of certainties, plans, and guarantees. We expose ourselves, and that's frightening. That's why so many people build walls around their hearts. Not because they don't want to love, but because they don't want to suffer anymore. Pain becomes a filter, and everything that passes through it seems too dangerous to live. But the hidden truth is that avoiding love, in an attempt to avoid pain, also distances us from the transformation that only true love can bring. It's not the kind of love that seeks security. It's the kind that changes you from the inside. Watts believed that love was not an agreement between two people, but a living, present experience. Something that happens in the now, not in what might come later. This is why love that tries to secure itself too much, that demands promises and control, begins to suffocate. And the paradox is this: the more we try to hold on to love tightly, the more it slips through our fingers. Because true love only grows where there is freedom. And that takes courage. True love is for those who accept the risk of not being loved back, of being frustrated, of not having everything under control, and still choose to continue. Not as someone who surrenders to an illusion, but as someone who decides to live with total presence. It's this shift in mindset that brings lightness, even in the face of uncertainty, because you stop seeking guarantees and start living the truth of what you feel now. This perspective has a direct impact on the wounds we carry, because when you understand that you don't need to control another person to feel safe, something opens up. You begin to realize that love isn't there to complete you, but to expand you. And the pain that once closed you off begins to become space for something new to grow. Not because the fear is gone, but because you chose to walk with it. And perhaps that's the most beautiful part of all this. The leap Alan Watts proposes isn't inconsequential. It's conscious. It's an internal decision to live authentically, even if it involves uncertainty. Because worthwhile love isn't the kind that comes with an instruction manual. It's the kind that pulses, that transforms, that invites you to be more yourself. It's curious to think how, even though we intensely desire to love and be loved, many of us find ourselves stuck in the face of the real possibility of surrender. We idealize love, searching for it in music, movies, books, but when it knocks on the door, imperfectly, vulnerably, without form, something inside us hesitates. It takes a step back, and that's where Alan Watts offers one of the most uncomfortable and necessary reflections, that true love can only exist when we are willing to shed our armor. To love is to make yourself vulnerable, and that in itself is frightening, because vulnerability, in our culture, is still confused with weakness. From an early age, we learn to hide what we feel, to control our emotions, to not show too much. And suddenly someone appears who shakes our structure, our certainties, and everything we had mastered within ourselves begins to leak out. Watts said that love is like letting go of life's flow without resistance. But how do you do that when your heart has already been wounded? How do you allow yourself to feel it all again, knowing there's a chance you'll suffer again? The answer isn't easy, but perhaps it's liberating. You don't need to guarantee you won't get hurt. You just need to accept that true love will always carry that risk. And precisely for that reason, it's so rare and so powerful. Have you ever wondered why we avoid true love? Why we run away from people who touch us deeply, while distracting ourselves with lukewarm, safe, predictable relationships? The answer often lies in our traumas, in the scars we carry without realizing it. Every disappointment from the past leaves a scar, and over time, we begin to confuse protection with emotional isolation. It's not that we don't want to love. We're just afraid of not being able to handle any more pain, afraid of repeating the abandonment, of reliving the silence, of feeling that feeling of giving everything and receiving so little. So we close ourselves off, even without meaning to. We create a version of ourselves that seems strong, determined, cool, but deep down, our heart is still there, waiting, hidden, waiting for the moment to trust again. And here comes the paradox that Alan Watts so clearly exposes. The more we try to control love, the less love there is, because love, by nature, doesn't accept control. It's born of freedom, of spontaneity, of the unexpected. When you try to mold it into what's comfortable, predictable, or strategically safe, what's left isn't love. It's a contract, an emotional transaction, something that resembles love in appearance, but not in essence. That's why so many people get frustrated, even when they're in relationships, because they're trying to live love as if it were a career path with goals, security, and a guaranteed return. But love isn't planned, it's allowed. It's like dancing. You don't control each other's every step. You get into the rhythm, feel it, improvise, and surrender. And that's where beauty lies. That's where something real begins to emerge. Watts believed that love only happens in the present moment. This may seem simple, even obvious, but think about it. How many times have you found yourself loving the idea of someone more than the actual person? How many times have you projected a future, created expectations, clung to the what if, and forgotten to look at the present? Loving someone isn't about what they might give you tomorrow. It's about what you share right now in this moment. No guarantees, no script. It's being with the other person, with everything they are, including their shadows, their inconsistencies, their bad days. Real love doesn't require perfection but presence. And presence requires surrender, total surrender. And here's something no one has ever told you before. True surrender is an act of courage, not romanticized, not impulsive, but conscious. Because when you surrender knowing you might get hurt and still choose to feel, you are living deeply. You are breaking with the superficiality that dominates so many relationships today. You are allowing yourself to be touched. You are, finally, alive. This kind of courage doesn't come from the absence of fear, it comes from the decision to go through it. And it's at that moment that something changes inside us. We stop running. We stop running from ourselves, from others, from life, and we begin to make space, to feel, to build, to trust, even with our heart racing. Now imagine how this insight can change the way you look at your old wounds. The traumas you carry no longer need to be walls. They can become portals, gateways to a new kind of love, more conscious, more mature, freer. Not perfect, but true. Because when you begin to understand that love doesn't come to complete you, but to transform you, everything changes. You no longer wait for others to save you. You begin to look at yourself with compassion. You begin to care for yourself, not to protect yourself from love, but to prepare yourself to experience it with greater presence. And then, little by little, fear gives way to curiosity, hurt gives way to learning, and control gives way to trust. Not because everything is guaranteed, but because you feel whole enough to live anyway. And maybe that's why, in the end, the leap is the only answer. Because love doesn't happen in theory, it happens in the leap. The moment you say, I don't know where this will lead, but I know what I feel now, and I choose to live it. And when you leap with an open heart, life responds, sometimes with love, sometimes with pain, but always with truth. This leap, as Watts said, isn't for everyone. It's for those who are tired of living half-heartedly, for those who understand that the risk of loving is the price of living intensely, and that the emptiness of not allowing yourself to feel is often crueler than any ending. The illusion of emotional security. Often, what holds us back isn't a lack of love, but our attachment to the idea of control, the almost desperate desire to predict, anticipate, and guarantee. Have you ever found yourself trying to read someone else, analyze signals, interpret gestures, and control the narrative to feel more secure? It's almost automatic. When we feel something real, we start trying to predict the outcome. But in practice, this is like trying to hold water in your hands. The tighter you squeeze, the more it drips. Alan Watts said that trying to guarantee love is precisely what kills it, because love happens in flux, and flux doesn't accept control. It demands trust, and this scares us, because it confronts us with the possibility of loss. But does avoiding this risk truly protect us? Or are we deep down simply distancing ourselves from life itself? There's a hidden truth that few have the courage to face. To love is to live without complete support. It's to navigate a territory of uncertainty, where there are no absolute certainties. And it's in this place that true love flourishes, because it's not the fruit of stability, but of continuous choice, choosing the other every day, even without guarantees. And that, in itself, is transformative. Because when you stop seeking security in others and start building security within from you, everything changes. Fear doesn't disappear, but it loses its power to paralyze you. You begin to love not from need, but from abundance. And then, love ceases to be an escape or a refuge, and becomes a space for expansion, behind the scenes of fear, the narratives we inherit. Much of our difficulty in loving stems from the stories we've inherited. We grow up watching movies where love is always ideal, predictable with happy endings and well-structured plots. We learn that love is about finding the lid, the other half, as if we were incomplete until someone else filled us. And this, besides being unfair, is dangerous, because it makes us place on the other a responsibility that isn't theirs. Watts deconstructs this idea with disconcerting lightness. He reminds us that we are whole, that no one comes to complete us. True love doesn't happen between needy halves, it happens between conscious wholes. It's an encounter, not a salvation. It's a sharing, not a disguised dependence. And here comes an essential point. Love shouldn't carry the burden of healing us. What heals is presence, the inner space we create to feel and transform. The other can be a mirror, a trigger, a journey partner, but not a remedy. When we expect love to fix us, frustration is inevitable, and love, little by little, becomes a disguised demand. How many times have you thought, I just need to find someone who understands me, someone who loves me just the way I am? And how many times has that become a silent pressure, waiting for the other person to do for you what you haven't yet had the courage to do for yourself? Alan Watts invites us to turn this around, to look within, to embrace our shadows, to not wait for love to come and heal us, but rather for it to find us already in the process of healing. The journey of detachment, love without possession. There's a huge difference between loving and possessing, and perhaps this is one of the biggest mistakes we make, because the fear of loss makes us want to hold on, and holding on in love is suffocating. Alan Watts speaks to this with disconcerting clarity. True love only exists in freedom. He doesn't demand that the other be a specific way, nor does he impose conditions for existence. He accepts, welcomes, observes, and remains, not out of obligation, but by choice. And here comes one of the greatest proofs of love, allowing the other to be who they are, even when it doesn't meet our expectations. But that hurts, doesn't it? It hurts when the other person doesn't reciprocate, when they change, when they leave. And then we understand how difficult it is to truly love, because loving requires letting go of the ego. Loving is accepting that the other person is free, and that, even if they're with us today, they can choose to leave tomorrow. Mature love doesn't bind, it trusts. And trust is not the absence of fear. Trust is the courage to feel fear and still remain, to look at another person and say, I love you enough not to try to change you. This is love as a lived experience, not as possession. The courage to be real, love without masks. In a world where so many people live for their image, true love is an act of rebellion, because it demands that we show ourselves as we are, without masks, without performance, without filters. And this is deeply uncomfortable, because we've been trained to hide, to look good, to show only our beautiful side. But love doesn't blossom in what's pretty. It's born in what's real, in what's raw, imperfect, human. Alan Watts said that love begins when we stop trying to be loved and start simply being. When you allow yourself to be whole before another, even with what's not so easy to show, you invite them to do the same. And then, a connection is born that isn't superficial. It's visceral. But not everyone is ready for this kind of encounter. And that's okay. Because true love requires not only courage but emotional maturity. And that only comes when we've already experienced a few setbacks. When it's hurt enough for us to understand that living a facade isn't worth it. When love heals what pain once broke. Have you ever been in a relationship that made you see your wounds more clearly? Sometimes love doesn't come to fill, but to reveal. It illuminates the dark corners. It shows where it still hurts. And as uncomfortable as it may be, that's precisely where healing lies. Because love, when experienced consciously, isn't just a feeling. It's a mirror. Watts said that love is allowing the other to touch what is most intimate within us. Not the body, but the being. And when this happens, there are two possible paths. Either you run away, or you look at yourself. When you choose to look at yourself, love becomes a portal, an invitation to grow, to rebuild yourself, to free yourself from what previously prevented you from living deeply. And over time, something changes. The wounds that once made you avoid love begin to transform into wisdom. The pain that once held you back now guides you. You begin to recognize patterns, respect your limits, and choose yourself, not as a barrier, but as a foundation, because those who know themselves begin to love with more lightness, more truth, and more surrender. Love as a daily choice and the leap as an answer. Love isn't something that simply happens and remains a fixed state. Love is a decision, a choice that needs to be made every day, even and especially on days when the initial enchantment fades. It's easy to love when everything is going well, when the other person says what you want to hear, when there's clear reciprocity. But what about when differences arise? When silences, insecurities, and flaws arise? It's at this point that many give up, believing love is over. But Alan Watts reminds us of something essential. True love isn't about static permanence, but about constant movement. To love someone is to continue choosing that person with awareness, freedom, and truth, even when fantasy gives way to reality, even when passion turns to intimacy and novelty turns to depth. The choice to love, therefore, is a leap. And this leap is not impulsive. It does not ignore the risks. It embraces them. The leap is the opposite of the paralysis of fear. It is when you stare into the abyss of uncertainty, and even so say, I am willing to live this. This kind of surrender is rare, but it is also what gives meaning to the experience of being alive. Because it is there, in extreme vulnerability, that true bonds are formed. When you love with this level of courage, something changes within you. The defenses that once protected you from pain also prevented you from fully experiencing life. But by allowing yourself to love, you become more human, more whole, more connected to something that transcends logic, and that can only be understood through experience. The hidden layers of love. Feeling, not explaining. Perhaps one of the greatest pitfalls of our generation is the attempt to rationalize everything, including love. We try to explain why we like someone, what we feel, how much it's worth investing, what the pros and cons are. But love in its purest form escapes such analysis. It doesn't reveal itself in spreadsheets or arguments. It just happens and demands silence, listening, surrender. Alan Watts spoke about this with almost poetic beauty. He said that the more we try to control love with our minds, the further we move away from its true experience. Because love is felt in the body, in the soul, in presence. It doesn't fit into a logical set. It pulsates. And when you try to explain it too much, you risk losing it. This doesn't mean that love should be lived recklessly. On the contrary, it requires awareness. But this awareness is emotional, not just rational. It's a kind of wisdom built through listening, observation, and shared silence. It's looking at the other person and feeling, I don't understand everything about you, but I'm here, present, willing to learn from you. This authentic presence is rare, and therefore so valuable. It heals old wounds, transforms patterns, opens paths, because in the end, the deepest love isn't the one that explains everything, but the one that embraces you, even when you don't know what to say. The falls, the ends, and the love that remains. No one emerges from love unscathed, because to love is to undress, and undressing is always risky. But what few realize is that even relationships that end continue to teach us about love. Sometimes the relationship ends, but love remains. It remains as a lesson, as a living memory, as a mark on the soul. Watts invites us to look at endings more kindly. He said that the end of a relationship isn't necessarily the end of love. It can be the end of a form, a cycle, a stage. But what was truly experienced endures. True love doesn't demand eternal permanence. It demands authenticity while it lasts. This vision is liberating because it takes us out of the prison of happily ever after and into the space of happy while we were whole. It teaches us that loving someone can also mean letting them go, and that this isn't failure, it's maturity. Relationships that end force us to look inward, to recognize what worked, what didn't, what we need to heal. And it's in this process that we grow. We prepare ourselves to love again, not in the same way, but with more wisdom, more presence, more truth. Love as a path to inner transformation. Few people realize, but love is one of the most spiritual experiences we can have, because it takes us out of our center. It confronts us with the other. It forces us to leave the self and enter into the we. And this, when experienced deeply, is a practice of transcendence. Alan Watts saw love as a path to expanding consciousness, not a possessive, needy, anxious love, but a liberating love, a love that embraces the other as they are, not as you wish them to be. This kind of love is rare, but it transforms. It changes the way you see the world, the way you relate, the way you exist. Loving like this isn't something you learn from a book. It's something you live, you practice, you build from within. Because true love begins with self-love, not the kind that's narcissistic, closed off, or arrogant, but the kind that's compassionate, aware, and mature. When you love yourself wholeheartedly, you don't settle for shallow relationships. You don't accept crumbs. You don't beg for attention, because you are already whole. And then, the love that arrives doesn't come to fill you. It comes to overflow. And if you've made it this far, it's because this conversation touched you in some way. And that, to me, says a lot. We talked about surrender, about courage, about the deepest layers of love. Not the kind that depends, but the kind that liberates. And if this kind of reflection resonates with you, if this way of looking at life and relationships inspires you, then I invite you to continue this journey with me. Subscribe to the channel here, because there's so much more to explore along the way. And each new video is an invitation to dig a little deeper, calmly, with presence, with truth. And leave a like on this video, not only because it helps, but because it was a way for us to find each other in this space. It's your way of saying, this conversation was worth it. Now, comment below, I'm with you until the end. I want to see who stayed here, who truly felt it, who is on this journey with an open heart. And if you want to continue in this spirit, there's a video right here that complements this topic in a special way. Click and continue with me there. The conversation is just beginning.